Welcome to the Next Level Life podcast with Christine Corcoran. This podcast is made for the powerhouse businesswomen who are ready to ignite their fullest potential. This is where we will dive deep into the mindset breakthroughs and sprinkle in some kick up the butt motivation so you can scale your business with confidence and clarity. Whether you're craving more income, impact, or inspiration, this podcast will be your ultimate resource for all things next level. Listen in as we have authentic conversations with game-changing female entrepreneurs as we reveal the secrets on what it takes to rise and thrive. So go ahead, ignite your inner fire, and let's get you taking massive aligned action. Are you ready to elevate? Let's go. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. So excited that you are joining in and tuning in with this episode. I feel like this episode is one that you kind of have to replay to yourself every month, right? Like at least once a month to remind yourself just to be aware of your self-talk and whether you're getting negative. I recently ran a session for my Next Level Mastermind ladies all about self-talk and the inner dialogue that happens and how it's so imperative that you improve it, you elevate it so then it can become your cheerleader, because the way that you speak to yourself is so important. It is the biggest relationship that you will have with anyone, the longest relationship you will have with anyone in your entire life is your relationship with yourself, and how you speak to yourself matters. The reason why it matters so much is it becomes part of your identity. And that's why I had to pause, right? Because it actually becomes part of your identity. It becomes part of who you believe you are. And then what happens from there when you hold on to a belief system that is not so positive, that is actually something that is not necessarily even true, but you hold on to it because of your programming, which I'm going to get into in a minute. But the reason why it's so imperative that you decide to change it is because when a negative belief becomes part of your identity, you act in accordance with that belief system. You consistently act in accordance with that belief system. So if you believe that you're not good enough, if you believe you're not cut out for this, if you believe that you're just not good at this thing that you really want to do, if you believe that you don't have the right sounding voice or you don't have the right look, if you have this negative self-talk that you're not smart enough, not good enough, not qualified enough, like whatever it is that you're telling yourself, you will absolutely continue to live into that until you change it. So that's why I wanted to do an episode on this, because it is probably something I should do regularly, is to remind you that the thoughts that are running through your mind are made up. They're made up. So it's so imperative that you decide to actually replace them with positive thoughts, with belief systems that will actually serve you moving forward. So where does our self-talk even come from? Our self-talk gets picked up and evolves month in, month out, right? Depending on what you're consuming. So what you consume will become part of who you believe you are. And it's so imperative that you recognize what's actually really positive and what's necessarily not something that you want to hold on to. So it is consistently evolving. So some of the things that you say to yourself are picked up from songs that you listen to or TV shows that you watch or anything else that you repeat on a regular basis, you actually hold on to. Secondly, it is actually from our programming. So what I mean by that is that we download, honestly, the best way to describe it is literally we download these belief systems from our life experience. And when we find that there's some element of truth to it, right? Whether we have evidence to back it up or whether we believe it or have this feeling within us, we kind of feel like it's true, so then it must be true. And so then our body responds to that with a chemical response, right? And then your brain continues to think belief systems, think thoughts that align with that feeling of not feeling good enough or whatever it is that you're repeating to yourself. So our programming can come from lots of different places. It can come from your education, your upbringing, your schooling, anything basically before the age of 25, right? So we have the different stages of development within our brain. So between the ages of 0 to 7, we have what we call the imprint phase, where your brain is literally like a sponge and it's taking on through your 5 senses all these stories and experiences and meaning based on your experiences at that age. So you are learning how to relate to other people. You're learning how to speak to yourself by seeing other people talk to themselves and what they say out loud, what they say to you. You are experiencing all these different experiences in your lifetime between the ages of 0 to 7. Your brain takes it on as truth because it doesn't actually have the capacity to have context and doesn't have the ability to actually determine what's real and what's not real because your brain is at such an early developmental stage. So then we go on to the persona stage, which is between the ages of 8 to 14, when you're starting to determine that you are a person and you are starting to step outside of your family unit, usually as you step into your high school years, and you're starting to determine who you are as a person in the world, right? And so then you're starting to kind of rebel against what your parents have said, and you're starting to learn new things. You're starting to learn what it means to be in the world. You're learning history, you're learning all of these different things of what it means, and then you're being asked about, like, who do you want to be when you grow up? And you're starting to have these thoughts and belief systems, and you're starting to determine who you are within your friend group and your circles and who you belong with. And then we have different experiences. So we might have things that people have said to us. We might have things that we've, taken on board as truth. Maybe you weren't good at some type of subject and then you take on a belief system about that. Maybe you have a different experience with friendships and then you're like, okay, well, it's not okay for me to show this part of myself, so I've got to close that part of myself down. Like whatever it is, we have so many different experiences that we happen throughout our childhood and our adolescent years that can actually become part of our programming moving forward. Then we go into the next phase of life when you're stepping out into the world, right? You're stepping out of the family unit, you're going out into the world, you're getting a career, you're starting to figure out who you want to be and how you want to live in this world, and your brain is still not fully developed, right? Your brain isn't fully developed until you're around the age of 25, and the last thing to develop is your ability to make sound decisions. So to be able to have context, to be able to determine, okay, what's for me, what's not for me, what do I want to believe? Your brain isn't fully developed yet until you're 25, right? Like, isn't that crazy? So we've taken on board all of this programming from all these years of our younger years when our brain was still developing. And some of the stories that we tell ourselves, some of the self-talk that we have repetitively has actually come from younger years. It's come from our programming. And so whenever I explore this with a client, we want to uncover, like, what are the things that you're constantly saying to yourself on an everyday basis, right? There's usually some type of repetitive thing that you say to yourself, or when things aren't going right, then you say something to yourself, or when things are going right, you say something else to yourself. And so sometimes that can be negative, it can be positive. And so we want to first pay attention to what your consistent thoughts are when you have your negative self-talk. Like, what does your brain say to you? How are you mean to yourself? How do you talk down to yourself? Right? And so what are some of the thoughts that you're having when you're noticing your negative self-talk? And so what we want to pay attention to firstly is the repetition, right? So which ones do you repeat to yourself regularly? That's usually probably your programming. And so we want to determine where that came from. So where did that thought even come from? Is when you say it to yourself in your head, is it your voice or is it someone else's voice? Because if it's someone else's voice, we want to recognize it didn't come from you. And then we want to determine where it came from so we can work through releasing the past and letting that go, because holding on to that, the only way it stays alive is by you repeating it to yourself again and again and again, right? It doesn't have to be true. There are so many different other forms of truth in your life. So we get to actually determine, is this programming serving us? Is it useful for me to think this? And if the answer is no, then you want to determine whether you want to change it or not. And so holding on to it probably isn't, even though it feels familiar and comfortable, probably isn't serving you. So once we are aware of it, because awareness is that first step, we're aware of it, we explore whether it's part of your programming or whether it's just something you've picked up more recently. Because sometimes you might have picked up something recently where it was just from a story or something you watched on social media or a movie or something like that where you're like, actually, I keep repeating it because it's kind of funny, but it's actually not really healthy for me to say that to myself. So I need to actually get rid of that. And so once we know this, one, we want to release and let go and forgive the past, right? That old programming from the past, because if it's not your voice, or even if it is your voice, you want to recognize that was a past experience. You've evolved, you've grown, and you are now a different person of who you are right now. And it is now 2024. Right? You're not that old person that experienced that when you were 14. And so you want to recognize what's shifted and changed in those years. We start to poke holes into that old belief system so we can let it go and start to replace it with something more useful. So and sometimes you even have to have an argument with yourself about it, right? I know that sounds really kind of crazy, but it's actually the really best way to go about it, because you want to address it, you want to bring it to the table, you want to address it and be like, okay, is that even true? When I say that to myself, is it true? Like when I say I'm not good enough, like, is that true? Right? In what context is that true? If you're saying like, well, we're not cut out for this, maybe you need to actually digest that and go, well, hang on a minute. It's not about whether you're cut out for it, it's whether you actually want to do it or not, right? And maybe you've proven to yourself over the last few years that you are actually cut out for it. And there's so many different ways to have different results. And maybe you're measuring yourself based on high expectations and instead of actually measuring your progress. So we want to actually just unpack and sort of poke holes in that belief system and start having that argument with yourself, because it's actually not true. And so usually what I'll say to someone is, if you would not say that thing to a friend or someone that you love, then stop saying it to yourself, right? It does not have to be true, but if you keep repeating it to yourself, it will continue to stay true for you. So we want to stop saying it. We want to have that new relationship with yourself to be like, no, I deserve better. I would never ever let anyone say such a horrible thing to someone else that I love. So why am I allowing myself to say it to myself? So we want to stop it. We literally want to stop it in its tracks and be like, nope, not saying that to myself today. And really like pay attention and bring awareness to it whenever it happens, and then start to reframe it, right? So we want to replace it with something much more kind. We want to replace it with something that's actually supportive and useful for you to move forward. Because what happens, right, when you have that negative self-talk, you end up having an emotional response to it, and then you'll have an action response to it, which is probably not serving you. So it might cause you to go eat something to deal with your feelings, or it might cause you to procrastinate on the thing that you actually want to take action on. Like whatever it is, it's probably not healthy. So what we want to do is go, well, I'm no longer going to say that to myself. What can I say to myself instead? And we've got to find something in the meantime. It can't be something that's complete opposite to what you've said to yourself in the past, because if you've repeated, oh, I'm not good enough to do this for so many years, to replace it with, oh, I am good enough to do this, might feel really hard, like it's a huge leap. So you want to come back to something in between of like, I'm learning to get really good at this, or I'm developing the skills to get great at this, right? So we want to start to actually build a thought in between that actually supports you. And the best way to do that is think about, if a friend was going through this and saying this to themselves, what would you say to them instead? And so this is where I sometimes find positive mantras or affirmations can come into place as well. It's really good to actually start replacing that negative self-talk with some really positive self-talk. Start speaking to yourself with absolute kindness and start having that new relationship with yourself where it's a non-negotiable, where you no longer say to yourself these negative things, right? So when you look at yourself in the mirror, right? Mirror work is such powerful, incredible, powerful work that you can do, even though it's super uncomfortable. So starting to actually have a few mantras that you say to yourself in the mirror when you're doing your makeup or we're getting ready for the day, where you stop and actually look yourself in the eyes in the mirror and say, I love you. You are lovable. You are lovable 100% of the time. You are kind. You are generous. You are a loving person and you deserve love, right? That might feel super extreme to begin with. You could just start with, your makeup looks really good today, right? You could just start with, do your best today. Everything is always working out for you. I've got your back. We can do this, right? Start with some terms that actually just feel okay to begin with. And then you'll get towards becoming more confident with being able to say, I love you, right? So if it feels really uncomfortable to do that right now, then you obviously need to lean towards that because it feels so foreign, right? That's why it's uncomfortable, because your body and your brain's like, whoa, we never say that to ourselves, right? We usually go, you're an idiot. You're so dumb. You look fat. Like whatever it is, like got to stop saying that negative stuff and actually replace it with, I love you. You're doing so well. Keep going. You've got this. Every step you take towards the goal that you want to achieve is making you a better human, right? You are getting healthier, happier, and wealthier every single day. Keep taking that action. You've got this. You are so good at this. Oh my God, you're smashing it, right? Start saying incredible things to yourself and you will see how it starts to pick things up, right? It has a different emotional response. It has a different action response. And before you know it, you'll be being your own cheerleader. Because that's what I really want for you, where you actually back yourself so much that you're not being delusional in the place of like, you're amazing. Like you are the biggest baller. Like, no. It's like literally like having your back. No one else has to know that you do it, but you have to have your back every step of the way. And this is what I see with women in business, that we don't often have our backs and we're looking so much for that external validation or support and appreciation from everybody else, when really you actually need to give that appreciation to yourself first. You need to appreciate you. You need to value you. You need to love you. And when you come back to that place and you really develop that relationship with yourself and you learn to honor your word with yourself, everything else is easier. You learn to figure things out no matter what. You're less harsh to yourself when things don't go well, right? You know that it's actually just part of the journey. So you've got to be your biggest cheerleader every step of the way. So I hope today's episode helps you bring awareness to some of the thoughts that you're having about yourself. And I would implore you to do this work because it is absolute game changer. When you can be your own cheerleader, everything else is so much easier, and everything's actually like cherry on top of the cake, right? Because you're like, then you get feedback that's positive from elsewhere, you start to gather all this incredible evidence that it's like, yeah, I am doing a good job. Yeah, I am making progress. Oh my God, I'm smashing this. This is so good. Everything is always working out for me. Holy hell. I'm such a kind person. I'm so generous. I'm so loving. Like I absolutely deserve love too. And so when you actually start to embody that, you start to attract more experiences that find that to be true. And so then you're living in accordance with that belief system, and you're also attracting that truth as well and those experiences, which is exactly what I want for you. So please start working on your self-talk. Stop negatively talking to yourself. Start using something more useful that's more supportive rather than tearing yourself down. I love you. You're amazing. Keep smashing it. You've got this. Thank you for listening, and if you've found any value out of this episode, make sure you hit the follow button so you get access to the episodes as soon as they are live, and make sure you come hang out with me on Instagram. You can find me at @ChristineCorcoran_coach. Have an incredible week.